Namaste. Welcome to Vichar Manthan. My name is Rajashekar Asireddy, and I will be the chair for this evening's Manthan. Many of you are familiar with our platforms who are attending events regularly. For those who are new to the platform and attending for the first time, Vichar and Manthan are Sanskrit words. Vichar means ideas, Manthan to churn or discuss. That's what we do at Vichar Manthan, exploring ideas. Vichar Manthan, VM for short, is a public engagement platform exploring contemporary British issues through Hindu civilizational lens, or we can call it as in light of Dharma. We bring expert witnesses onto our platform. Our aim is to explore ideas in an earnest manner. We are not here to provide perfect solutions. Rather, we provide the rigor and ask questions and give you an opportunity to challenge those ideas and also engage with our expert witnesses by asking questions. Today, we explore what is a Hindu. First of all, why are we talking about this topic? There are over 1 billion Hindus on our planet. Many of them are living in India. It is almost 1/6 of the world population. For many, Hindu means religion. But the living experience of a Hindu doesn't follow the conventional religion path. The religion, as we know it in the Western world, does it even fit into the Hindu framework at all? And also, and it is common understanding as well, I think Hindus themselves struggle to pin down on a simple language that captures the fullness of what it means to be a Hindu. Is there incoherence in the identity itself? Which leads to many questions. Who is a Hindu? Is the term religious in nature or represent an ethnic group or neither? Or does it represent the culture of the people who are living in this region? Or is Hindu is the identity rooted in any belief system? And there are many other sects or Sampradayas based on Hindu. What are all the commonalities between them? All of these questions leads to an ultimate question. That is, what makes one a Hindu? Is it by birth or living by a particular set of rules or dogmas? To manthan this topic, we are joined today by Acharya Siddhartha Krishna, who is based in Omkarananda Ashram in Rishikesh, India. He is a spiritual master and also a teacher of Indian philosophy, covering Advaita Vedanta, Patanjali Yoga, and Sanskrit. Along with teaching, Siddhartha ji writes columns for Australia Yoga Life and also Yoga Journal, China. Also, we have Dr. Sachin Nandha, who is a political philosopher with a PhD in liberty and liberalism. He is also an ex-CEO, sits as non-exec for a few companies. He devotes most of his time to work with organizations to bring societal change. Welcome to Vichar Manthan, you both.
Namaste, pleasure to be here.
Namaste, thanks for having me.
Namaste. Before we enter into the discussion, this evening's Manthan format is, we have in total 90 minutes. We start with our speakers' initial remarks, followed by a discussion between the speakers and myself, which is going to be about 40 minutes. Then we will have a very extended audience Q&A for almost 30 minutes. I encourage everyone who joined on our YouTube, ask questions by using YouTube live chat function. Sachinji, we'll start with you. Can you address in your initial remarks? It is a two-part question, by the way. First, where does the word Hindu come from? And followed by, what makes someone a Hindu? You have 5 minutes to cover this. I know it's a big topic, but if you could cover in 5 minutes, that would be helpful. And over to you, Sachin.
Of course. I've now shared this platform with you once before, Raj, and I know how much you push us to be condensed and dense in our explanations. So I will do my best to describe, as I see it, the explorations that I have made into the Hindu identity. And let me just caveat it that what I'm proposing is a different direction of thought. What I am not suggesting is any conclusive definition. Definitions and words evolve over time, over history, over civilization. And the Hindu civilization, today we label it as Hindu. 2,000 years ago, it was not labeled so. And 3,000 years ago, it certainly wasn't anything like that. So the word, the civilization that we today refer to as the Hindu civilization is a fairly modern rendition for that civilization. Now, you will note that I have immediately started using the word civilization, meaning that my opening premise is that there was a civilization, right? A unified a group of people who lived in a particular territory that ranged from Afghanistan today, the borders of Iran, all the way as far up as to what we call Myanmar today, from the borders of Tibet and maybe even in Tibet, all the way down to Sri Lanka. That entire region was inhabited by a unified civilization, and I use that word consciously, which of course a lot of people would not agree with. So a lot of academics, starting from colonial times, have always rendered that there is no such civilization in ancient India, that actually you have just a real melting pot of castes, tribes, religions, practices, languages, and so therefore actually there is no such thing as Hindu. That's a very much a modern concept that the British created. A lot of Western academics, in fact, a lot of Indian academics in the West would also render their opening premise in that way. I have rejected that, right? Now, I don't plan to make a big argument or a discussion about that, but what I do want to therefore say is, so therefore, what is this term Hindu? The word Hindu itself is fairly modern, and broad brushes, I will be quite dense and concise and therefore quick, is that it comes from the Farsi or the Persian, where the river Sindhu, which is now no longer, but it used to demarcate the territory between the Persian Empire, broadly speaking, and the ancient India. So that river called the Sindhu, which of course was the region where you had the ancient Harappa civilization. Again, today we label it as the Harappa civilization, but actually one can quite easily argue that it's a continuum of Hindu civilization. They were scattered all around that region. In fact, the Vedas and a lot of the classical Hindu literature that we will refer to comes from that part of the world as well. And so basically the Persians, who can't render the word sa, rendered it as ha. So Sindhu became Hindu. And therefore the people who lived across the waters were labeled as Hindus. The Hindu people themselves did not label themselves in those terms. They would call themselves Arya. They would call themselves Sanatani. They would call themselves many different groups. But of course, that's nothing surprising, right? The ancient Britons didn't call themselves British. It was only after the Romans came along that they classified this entire group as Britons, right? So that's quite natural. That there's nothing clever about that. What makes a Hindu a Hindu? There are 4 buckets. The first thing I want to say is that the Hindu identity today is not built upon a specified territory. It is not built on a religious construct because it is not dependent on any particular narrow set of beliefs or dogma. Right? So we can unpack that later, but that is an opening statement. Therefore, what is the Hindu identity built upon? It is built upon a cultural experience. So the Hindu identity refers to a culture, right? Second thing is that a Hindu by nature has some deep affinity, consciously or unconsciously, with the land of Bharat. Now, I use the word Bharat consciously so I can demarcate it between modern state of India, which is a political state since 1947, and Bharat, which is a cultural movement of an ancient civilization, which again ranged from Afghanistan to Myanmar, Tibet to Sri Lanka. So when I refer to Bharat, I'm talking about classical civilization, right? So that's why I use the word Bharat. So the word Hindu is rooted in Bharat. Number three is that the Hindu identity is rooted in a specific set of literature and traditions. A specific set of literature and traditions. And the fourth thing is that the Hindu identity, by its very nature, is a plural identity. The Hindu mind is plural, which makes it very unique when we think about other identities that we will naturally compare the Hindu to, i.e. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, or even some of the other religious creeds that exist today. All of them are built upon a narrow set of dogma, right? Right or wrong is a different issue, but the Hindu identity is not, and that makes it uniquely different. And I'll end my final remarks. I know I'm a minute over. I will just say this. The reason why the Hindu identity is more it's important for us to get our head around it and to learn to express ourselves out of colonial tropes is because Hindus, as you rightly mentioned in your opening statement, are 1/6 of humanity. And as Hindus rise economically, socially, culturally, it will inevitably influence the world and shape the global order in the next couple of centuries. And that's why it is important that we own and we discuss this identity.
Thank you, Sachin. In 5 minutes or 6 minutes time, you mentioned quite a lot of in there, and I'm sure we're going to pick from that in the next 30, 40 minutes time. And also, Siddhartha, I would like to your comment on some of those things. But before that, in your initial remarks, every time we discuss about Hindu, the discussion never ends without referring to Dharma. In your initial remarks, if you can define for us what is Dharma and what is the relationship between Hindu and Dharma?
Yes. Thank you very much, Rajashekar ji. One thing is very clear, and I'm saying this because today in India, Dharma has become the Indian Hindi word for religion. Yet, there is in fact no word for religion in Sanskrit language. It's a concept which has come to India from as religions from Semitic culture came to India, and Indians had to find a word for it. So the word dharma was chosen, and it became, today it's a synonym for religion. In fact, in most Eastern languages, there is in fact no word for religion, and the word that is used for religion, for example, even in Indonesia, the word agama is used. Agama doesn't really mean religion. Agama means received knowledge or wisdom, which has been received through a lineage of student and teachers. So it has nothing to do with the idea of religion. Similarly, the word dharma is a very universal concept. It refers to the good qualities, the good virtues, the noble virtues, the good deeds that enable a person to rise and attain the best. That is how Maharshi Kanada from the Vaisheshika Darshana, Vaisheshika philosophy, the author of the Vaisheshika philosophy, and it's quite a standardly accepted definition of the word dharma, that dharma is that which enables the society to rise and attain whatever is considered to be the best, particularly in spiritual terms. The word in itself, dharma, means to bear, to support, to hold up. When one looks at the commentaries of the Bhagavad Gita, particularly recently, I was giving lectures on the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and I noticed something, that when the word nyaya, which is the Sanskrit word for justice, occurs in the I think it's in the 15th verse of the 18th chapter, most of the Sanskrit commentators straight away see it as a synonym of dharma. So there is also a deep relationship between the idea of dharma and justice. Dharma is also the highest dharma is understood to be in a concentrated state of mind. That is how Vedavyasa explains dharma in Mahabharata. So, as we can see here, it is related to meditation, it is related to justice, it is related to noble qualities, good virtues, and good deeds. So this is what dharma meant, something that supports the individual, allows that person to lift themselves up. So in that sense, that's what the word dharma stands for. And I don't see how this should relate, in fact, with the word religion, and yet it is used for it in modern times, which has sort of created a little bit of confusion in the society, I think.
Okay, and what is the relationship between Dharma and Hindu? Is there any direct correlation?
Depending on what we mean by the word Hindu.
Actually, before that, Siddhartha-ji, sorry
to
interrupt you there.
Fine. Perfectly
if you
fine.
can comment on the first question which we started with, where the word Hindu come from.
Yes.
I know Sachin just mentioned this is, the Sindhu becomes a Hindu.
Yes.
And in our Hindu scriptures, and
Yes.
they goes back to thousands of years of old, up to 5,000 years. Some of them refer them as in
Yes.
any of the scriptures or
Yes.
any of the texts refers
Yes.
to the word Hindu, or is there any reference to the word Hindu in ancient texts?
Yes. I absolutely agree with whatever Sachinji has said regarding this word. It's clearly of Persian origin, and for that reason, I don't know of a Sanskrit text that actually uses the word. The Sanskrit version of this word, which is Sindhu, even as a name of a country, of a land, can already be found in Rig Veda, which is the most ancient text in India, where the word Sapta Sindhushu, which means the land of the 7 rivers, because the word Sindhu in fact means river. So the land of the 7 rivers. And these are the 7 rivers that we usually evoke when we take bath. Gange cha Yamune chaiva, Godavari, Saraswati, Narmade, Sindhu, and Kaveri. These 7 rivers which sort of purify this land with their holy waters. So the land of the 7 rivers, this Sapta Sindhu, this word is clearly has been used in the Rig Veda. So it's an extremely ancient word. However, the Iranians used to refer to Sapta Sindhu as Hapta Hindu, which again the land of the 7 rivers, because they tend to pronounce sa and ha, sa as ha. Something which is very interesting, that even in extremely ancient Vedic grammar, there is Maharshi Yaska, 6th century BC, he has composed a text known as Nirukta, which is the standard text for Vedic grammar. He, in fact, gives versions, alternative versions. For example, he gives Saraswati, the alternative version of Saraswati is Haraswati. So even Saraswati can be Haraswati. The word for river, another word for river, Sarita, is also Harita for him. So it is very clear that in his time, 600 BC, 2,600 years ago, there was a practice of, even in India, that sometimes Sa was pronounced as Ha. So in that sense, the word is, as Sapta Sindhu, it's very ancient as the name of this land, but Hapta Hindu would have been a Persian, which again, I must say that there are tremendous similarities between ancient Persian and Indian culture. I can understand 75% of the words in the Gathas, the teachings of Zoroaster. And the Gathas actually follow most of the rules of Panini. Iran, in fact, comes from the word Arya, some people believe. So we are talking about languages and cultures that, if not the same, were extremely similar back then. After all, they were neighboring countries like India and Nepal. So,
thank you, Siddhartha. Thank you. I think it looks like that's very interesting to know. Hindu is come from someone from the outside source, and they're calling us a Hindu and adapted to it. It would be very interesting if we can unpack in the or rest of the discussion. If not for Hindus, is it going to be a Sindhus or something else? Probably we'll find that in our discussion next. Sachinji, coming back to you, let's pick the latest UK being Vichamantan, UK centric. In our recent 2021 census, Hindu listed as a religious identity. And when you're picking your religion, they listed Hindu as one of your religious identity. Is a Hindu, in your opening remarks, you mentioned this is not based on the religion, but is it a Hindu religion? Is Hindu is a religious identity? If not, why is it not? Then what is it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's worth unpacking. Okay, so a couple of things. One is we have to understand that this term Hindu becomes incredibly popularized during the colonial period, right? It was there before the colonial period, but certainly becomes rooted. It becomes fossilized, if I can use that word, during the colonial period. So therefore, what happens is that the colonial, now by colonial, I'm talking about that in this case, the latest colonial project in India was the British project, right? So the British understood the world in paradigms of religion because that was their culture, right? The pluralism of ancient Europe had already been wiped out many, many centuries prior. So the British themselves came with a very, very dogmatic, when I say dogmatic, I don't mean it in a pejorative sense. I mean it in the literal sense. They came with a particular creed, right? They came with a worldview. And there were two worldviews, if I can paint broad brushes because of time. One is the Christian worldview, right? Where there is a specific divinity up there in time, outside of time and space, right? There is some creator being that is all powerful, all benevolent, and that creator being has created the world and blah, blah, blah. And that creator has a particular will, right? And so the will that the creator has is what must happen on earth, right? And that we call Christianity. Okay. And so they came with, and the second paradigm that they came with was the Enlightenment paradigm, where the world and everything in it was mechanized, right? Was a set of, it was something to be discovered. It was something to be understood, and divinity was slowly corroded out. Okay, so now what you have is when the colonialists came, when the British arrived in India, India was already on a downward spiral. It had been on a downward spiral since about 1000 AD, possibly 1200, but certainly in a downward spiral, economically, socially, politically, in every sense. So what happens is that the British come along and see this from a religious perspective. And what they saw was a massive landmass. And you have to understand, India is much bigger than what the maps show us, right? In real life, because of the way the world is shaped, India looks a lot smaller on the visually than it really is. So when the British arrived, they realized this is a huge landmass with so many languages, so many dialects, so many customs and traditions and rituals and etc., and they could make no sense of it. Now, in order to administer such a large continent, they had to create certain abstractions. They had to create boxes, and people had to fit in those boxes. That was the only sensible way, in their view, of managing such a large and a huge population. And you have to understand, India was Britain's cash cow, and therefore it was important for Britain to be really, really efficient in their bureaucracy, right? In terms of how they extract the wealth out of India, right? That was very much their project. Now what happens is we've brought that into 21st century, and what we have is a census. And the census, remember what the census is. Census is not a statement of truth. The census is not a statement of reality. The census is an abstraction of what is reality, right? So the census, in order for bureaucrats to understand whom they are serving, they have to categorize everybody. So in Britain, Hindu is a categorization of a religion. But that's, I mean, if you ask any civil servant, and which I have, what do you categorize as a Hindu? They can't answer that question. They really can't answer that question. Their answer is, oh, well, those people who come from India, who are not Sikh, not Buddhist, not Jain, they do it through negation. They've got nothing positive to say about the Hindu identity, right? By positive, I mean a positive description. So this is just a colonial baggage that I'm afraid you and I have to fit into in order to live on this island. Now, does it categorize our lived experience? No, absolutely not. What it does is that it further fragments the Hindu identity. Now, my argument, which I would love to unpack later, is that the Hindu identity is a cultural identity which has many, many religions within it. So Swaminarayan is a religion of the Hindu culture. ISKCON is a Hindu religion, right? A religion from the Hindu culture. But so is Jain, so is Sikh, so is Buddhist, so is Buddhism stems from the Hindu culture, right? It may not be the most dominant culture, dominant religion in India today, and it certainly has migrated all over the world, but its roots, its philosophy, its scripture, and Siddhartha will be much more clued up than I am on that area. But I'm sure he will concur when I say that the philosophical connections between all of this clearly shows evidence that this is part of one culture. Now, the British just don't understand that. The Hindus don't understand that. So it's for us to own that identity and then educate the world as to what our lived experience really is.
Okay. Thank you, Sachin ji. So far what I'm hearing is the word we got Hindu from outside, and the way we are putting it in a different box, and we're still carrying that box as in a religion. This is getting even more interesting as we're getting more and more into the detail. And as you said, we're going to get into, in our next question, probably go into the cultural identity side. But before we move on to that, I'd like to ask Siddhartha ji, now we've seen the religious as an identity, but at the same time, in a Hindu today, rituals takes in a core part of the tradition. In every, if you talk of any Hindu, like another puja or murti or Bhagavan temple, the rituals are like one of the core part of it. What is the importance of these rituals in a Hindu identity, Siddhartha ji?
Yes. I will answer this question from a spiritual perspective.
Sure.
From a ritualistic perspective, they have material benefits. That is the faith, that is the belief that that we have when we perform certain rituals. So it can be to acquire some worldly possessions, worldly happiness, or otherworldly happiness. But what interests me tremendously from a spiritual perspective is that They are to be performed selflessly for the sake of inner purification. That is what we find in the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna makes it clear that yajna, which is fire sacrifice, fire worship, and dana, which means charity, almsgiving, and austerity. These three practices should never be abandoned by someone because they purify. If someone wants to use them for inner development, which means to understand oneself, then they should be performed without being attached to their results. Then they become means to purify the heart. In this context, what I must say is that Hindu rituals, as we practice them, are in fact active meditation practices. The Sanskrit word for a ritual, upasana, which simply means to sit close to oneself, to sit close to the deity, to sit close to the divinity. In fact, in Sanskrit, the word can mean a worship ritual as well as a meditation practice. And the fact that any puja starts with assuming a correct asana, a correct posture, then doing pranayama to calm down the breath, to calm down the mind, in fact, simply is an indication that, that this entire session is an active meditation session. It's an external meditative practice where a lot of activity instead, and gradually then these rituals then are internalized and a person starts performing them internally. So from a spiritual perspective, they are performed for inner purification, but yes, otherwise they are also performed with certain beliefs that they bring certain benefits.
Just to follow up on that one, Siddhartha-ji, to be a Hindu, does one need to follow these rituals?
Okay, whether it is extremely important. For the sake of inner purification, I would say it is extremely beneficial. Then there are also rituals of purification, which are known as the samskaras. For example, Namakarana Sanskara, which is the name-giving ceremony.
Sure.
Marriage is there, and then Antyeshti Sanskara, once a person dies, then the cremation and all of that. So these samskaras are very much part of the life of every Indian. And even Jains, Sikhs, they have these samskaras, slightly different maybe in their own way, but they have it. So it's very much part of the life. And I can't imagine Hindu life completely without these samskaras. Even today, they are very much part of the Indian culture. People get married by calling pujaris, panditjis, and the same thing is done when they pass away, when a child is born. So it's still very much part of our daily life. So with that, otherwise, there are Hindus that don't worship as well. So yeah. As long as, yeah.
In that case, is it fair to say it is a personal choice, especially as in a meditation, as a personal?
It's completely a personal choice. It's completely a personal choice. A person is very much free. Some people prefer to dedicate their time to studying the texts,
Sure.
studying the teaching. Some would rather dedicate their time to meditation. Some others would dedicate their time to rituals. So there is a range of practices. Not everybody
Sure.
would perform those rituals. So it's not that you won't be a Hindu if you don't perform those rituals. But yes, you would be a better human being if you
Thank you, Siddhartha. Sachin-ji, going back to cultural identity. If it is a cultural identity, then can you define what is this? What does that mean? Or also, to be honest, can you even define what is culture? Or can you define culture for us?
Sure, sure. May I, Raj, if you don't mind, just reflect a little bit on what Siddhartha ji has just said? Is that
Sure.
okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing I mentioned in my opening caveat was that literature and traditions was one of the buckets that makes you a Hindu. And so when you talked about rituals, I would say that falls into the literature traditions bucket, right? Of the 4 buckets. Now, if you think about it, I have a Rakhi right here, right? That's a ritual, right? Now Hindus the world over, Hindus who are atheists will do this, right? So all of these things show that there is a lived experience that is beyond a narrow dogma or creed or belief. Now, and Siddhartha, I would love to have your thought on this, but my contention is that the beauty with which Siddhartha spoke about in terms of the rituals, my contention is that sadly, the modern Hindu society has degraded the rituals and their purposes to a very, very base and crude level. That is why today educated Hindus look at those rituals and go, well, that looks a bit weird. That's a bit arcane. That's a bit backward and superstitious. But actually what's happened is they are right. They're not wrong, but it's because the rituals themselves have been so degraded over hundreds and hundreds of years of the colonial project and the deindustrialization of India, and of course the destruction of Hindu literature, philosophy, etc., etc. So this is the result of that history. You and I are experiencing the sparkles of a 1,000-year-old tragedy, right? Now I would say, with likes of Siddhartha ji and people like him in the Samaj who are trying to re-uplift the meaning of ritual, the experience of rituals, and what their intent is meant to be. And I hope we can kind of recapture some of that previous sophistication, sophistry, and understanding over the next 100 years or so. So anyways, I just wanted to reflect on that. And I think that's really important for us to understand that the current state of the Hindu society is not at our peak. It's very much at a low base, and there is a renaissance happening, but it's still a renaissance. It's still there. In terms of what is culture, culture is very simple.
Thank you for that. And before you move on to the question, I'd just like to ask our audience to engage in the discussion. We have another 30 minutes in a short while we move on to audience Q&A. Please ask your questions in YouTube and we'll try to pick as many as we could. Sachinji, back to the culture question and the culture identity, please.
Sure. And the reason why I kind of reflected on what that's just because my culture answer is very short. so culture is very simple. Culture is basically the term that we give to the collective experience of a group of people. When a group of people effectively have a common shared history, shared geography, shared custom, shared beliefs, shared diets, that all accumulates to create a culture and a set of values. When those values are institutionalized, you get a civilization, right? That's culture. So Hindu is a cultural identity, not a religious identity. Why? Because it is not dependent on dogma or creed or beliefs. It is dependent on the collective experience of thousands and thousands of years of human experience, right? Rooted in a particular geography, a particular history, particular set of philosophies, literature, etc., etc.
Okay. So in a way, what we are saying is, just to summarize is that point, it is not a religious identity. And if that is not the case, so every time we talk about Hindu as in a religion, we're taking this concept from the Western idea and we are looking into that prism. And so the way we are understanding the Hindu culture or Hindu, the whole of the identity, we are approaching in a wrong way. Is that a fair way to say?
I think what's happening, if I may be brave enough to say, and you might get a lot of hate mail after this, is that I think the Hindu suffers globally. I'll class myself in that, okay? The Hindu suffers from 2 problems. One is amnesia. We are a culture that is suffering from amnesia all the time. We can't remember our history. That's a problem we have. And we can't remember our history because we have no institutions that really are robust enough to capture and to propagate that history, number one. Number two is that we are living as very, very good Hindus on the whole. And I think the Hindu contribution to humanity is immense, especially since 1947 and the rise of modern India and Hindus flourishing around the world. I think it's immense. However, because the Hindu mind is still coming out of the colonial experience, we are cognitively still colonized. And therefore, what's happening is we are living as Hindus, but when we come to utter the words, when we come to think about our own experience, we then become colonial again.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Sachin. Siddhartha, I want to go back to what Sachin earlier mentioned. He mentioned about Buddhists, Jains, and various other Sampradayas or sects in a loosely translated way, if you wanna call them, because they're also part of a Hindu culture, or they all originated from the same geographical area. What are all the commonalities between these different? I don't know whether we call them as religions. That's the one Sachin mentioned. If you agree in the same terminology, what are the commonalities between the Buddhists, Jains, and the Hindus? And also, from the philosophical point of view, what is the link between them?
Yes. Before I answer this question, I would just like to go back to what Sachin said regarding culture. And what came to my mind was the Sanskrit word for culture, which is a very beautiful word, Samskriti. We use it quite often. And Sanskriti means to make perfect, to become better, perfection. So from that perspective, culture would be an enterprise by the help of which we become better, we improve ourselves, we become more and more perfect as we grow. So it's a very beautiful word. I just wanted to add to.
I think that something that comes to my mind is to become fully human.
To become
culture allows us to become
fully human, and that in fact comes from the Rig Veda, Manurbhava Janaya Daivyam Janam, which means become a thinking being, Manushya, a human being, a thinking being, and create radiant beings that are radiant with wisdom, radiant with knowledge. So yes, it's really very, very beautiful. Now, as far as the commonalities are concerned, the similarities between particularly Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain, I believe that was the question of Rajashekar ji.
Yeah.
The different Sampradayas, the different lineages, as they are called, because all of them in India, whether it is Jainism, whether it is Buddhism, there is this lineage of student-teacher, teacher-student lineages where the wisdom, the mantras are received from a teacher by a student. And like this, the wisdom propagates, the living wisdom propagates down the generations over the centuries. So that's what the word Sampradaya means, which is generally now translated as sect. But again, sect in Christianity, sect in Islam might not have that idea, and Sampradaya is totally something very different. But yet we use them interchangeably, which is okay for the sake of ease. That is completely fine. Now, Hindu traditions themselves. So let's use the word traditions for now. Hindu traditions themselves, they are so varied. Then to find something common with Buddhist traditions as well as Jain traditions, I think two things that come to mind. First of all, Dharma, the word Dharma. I think that is one word that lies at the center, whether it is the Buddha's teachings, whether it is the Vedic teachings, whether it is the Jaina teachings. They are trying to define and explain and live the complexity of what Dharma is, how to improve, how to become better. So that's one thing. That's one point where they really converge and they really are united. Even, for example, Buddha in his teachings again and again, even not only Dhamma, but Esa Dhammo Sanantano, he uses the word Sanantana Dhamma, Sanatana Dharma, the eternal, timeless Dharma. He uses that expression. So it's very common in Hindu texts, in Buddha's teachings, as well as it. The other thing that has been noted by authors from these three traditions, whenever they were writing on yoga, because there is this Yogacara tradition in Buddhism, the yoga practice tradition in Buddhism, which is in Mahayana Buddhism. There are many great Jaina masters, Haribhadra Suri, Hemachandra, who have written a lot on yoga. And then, of course, yoga is central to the Hindu traditions. Something that happens very unique the moment they start writing about yoga, whether it is Vidyaranya Muni, for example, the great Advaita Vedanta author from the 13th century, whether it is Haribhadra Suri, 7th century, 8th century, great Jaina master. When they start talking about yoga, they say that yoga is what unites us. Yoga is what we might be. So what Vidyaranya Muni, for example, says that we might be very different in our philosophical positions. We might be very different in our beliefs. But when it comes to the 8 limbs of yoga, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, you would see all the rishis sitting in the same Padmasana. You would see the Buddha sitting in the same Padmasana. You would see Jaina masters sitting in the same Padmasana. So when it comes to these practices, the yogic practices, there they also converge very beautifully. So these two things, yoga and dharma, these two things really beautifully unify. I can't think of a tradition that does not center around these two things, because the practical approach of yoga and the idea of dharma is central to all the traditions. Otherwise, they are extremely varied. I would argue that more varied than Christianity is from Islam or Judaism. There you might find more similarity than many of the traditions in India.
Okay. Thank you, Siddhartha. Sachinji, going back to the 4 different elements which you mentioned, one of the things you mentioned was reverence to Bharat. What does that mean to people born in the UK? Do they need to have that bond as well to become a Hindu or to call themselves as a Hindu?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think what I'll do is I will dovetail my answer onto what Siddhartha just concluded with, right? Which is this thing about similarities and differences. So all of the Hindu, and Siddhartha, please correct me if I'm wrong right away, but I would say, as per my understanding, all of the religions that are under the Hindu umbrella, yes, there are differences, of course, it's a plural culture, but there is those things that binds them. But more than that, if you look at creed and dogma across a spectrum, so you have, let's just say, Islam at one end, Christianity, Judaism, etc., etc. If you look at all of those other creeds and dogmas, the differences between them and so Buddhism will have much more in common with all the other Hindu religions than it would have with any Christian creed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So therefore, you can clearly see, right, yes, that the roots of all of these religions lie in the Hindu culture, and you cannot deny that. You cannot, you can negate it, i.e., ignore it, but then you're either ignorant or you're being mischievous, one of the two. And I suspect modern world, 21st century Britain, so I'll bring it to Britain and then we'll come to this, is that there are a lot of people who are both ignorant and mischievous, and they've politicized religion in order to weaponize it in order to get material benefits, right? So recently, and again, I'm sorry, but you're going to get a lot of hate mail for this one. Recently, a lot of the Jain movements within the UK actively propagated amongst their congregation that you should tick the box Jain when it comes to the British census, and not the box Hindu. Now, most Jains traditionally ticked Hindu, right? They've now asked for this change. Why? Because they've philosophically discovered something deep and beautiful which told them that Jain is different to Hindu? No, absolutely not. It's because they are being mischievous or ignorant, and both in some mixture, concoction. But effectively, what's happening is, in order to gain material benefit from the British state, they are creating psychological separation. It's a shame, but that is the reality of our world. So I think it is worth putting it out there that your viewers can challenge, can think, and see if I am correct in my hypothesis. But I think it's worth putting it out there. And I've forgotten your question.
So on that note, I think I would encourage all our audience to asking more questions. I'm sure you'd like to challenge Sachinji on those points. If you have anything, please get onto YouTube live chat and ask the questions. And even we can take this discussion further as well, even if you don't get that time in between, in the next 30 minutes time or the 40 minutes time which we got. Going back to question, Sachinji, I think the question I'm asking was, earlier, one of the elements which you mentioned to be a Hindu was a reverence to Bharat, the word which you used. So does that mean to people born in the UK, what does that mean to people born in UK? I have no reverence to Bharat whatsoever.
Sure.
Do they need to have that bond to become a Hindu? I think that's the question.
So look, Hindu is a cultural identity, right? And like any identity, it is a gradation. It is not black and white, right? It is a gradation of colors. It's a spectrum, right? Now, at the one end of that spectrum, you might have, and if I may be brave enough to say, soft Hindus. At the other end of the spectrum, you may have what I might class as hard Hindus or fossilized Hindus, right? They're there. Now, everybody will ebb and flow, and throughout a lifetime, you will change in this spectrum. So it is a dynamic situation. It is a beautiful situation, right? It's now we have to be creative and nuanced and articulate enough to understand this. So in the 4 buckets, right, you might be pursuing lots of rituals. And for the benefit of the doubt, let me be positive, they are following the rituals the way Siddhartha ji mentioned, that they are there to uplift you and to make you fully human, right? Okay, but you may have never been to India, the modern state of India, which is not what I'm referring to at all. I'm referring to Bharat, that cultural landmass, right? Now, of course, where does that culture today flourish? It is India, the modern state of India. And that's the connection between Bharat and the modern state of India, right? So look, you may be following rituals, but you may have never been to India. That's okay. You may have gone to India 20 times and really loved the experience of India every time you go, but you don't follow a single ritual. Okay, you might do both, right? And so what I'm suggesting is that if you look at the 4 buckets, the reverence to Bharat is simply this, that you are psychologically aware that which you are practicing, the customs and traditions and rituals, the literature that you're consuming, the very psychology which you have now developed through your upbringing is rooted in that space.
Okay.
That's what I mean by that. It's a psychological statement and a lived statement, not a legalistic or a creed or dogma.
Okay. So with that, are we ruling out Hindu is not even a geographical identity? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, because look, people wrongly say this, but broadly speaking, Savarkar said in 1920s that Hindu is somebody who is who lives in India and is from India, right? And by India he meant the wider, by the way, Afghanistan, all the way to Myanmar and that whole range. That's what he was referring to in 1920s. That is now, I would argue, an out-of-date definition or even understanding of the word Hindu. I am Hindu and I will live and die on this island of Britain, right? And there are 55 million of us outside of India, and our children and our children's children may only visit India on a pilgrimage, may only go there once in a lifetime, right? Some may never visit, but they will be very much Hindu in their custom, tradition, literature, philosophy, psychologically, plural, etc., right? So I would say that the Hindu identity now is no longer rooted to just a territory. Of course, territory plays a role because modern state of India is the representation of Bharat today, and therefore it is there, but it's not rooted to that.
Okay. So if I understand that correct, or I have some confusion and the challenge here, so the Hindu as a word comes for a geography. It comes from whether it is come from Iran or someone from the outside, they refer Hindu as in a place which is outside the Sindhu, or they pronounce as Sa to Ha, Sindhu become Hindu. Now what we are saying is the Hindu is not even the geographical identity, it is now completely different. So this is completely evolved from where it was, from a geographical identity to a religious identity. This is where the Britishers were trying to box it. To now we are saying it is a cultural identity. Is that
right? A universal cultural identity, yes. And therefore, the Hindu identity does not equal brown. It does not equal Indian. A Hindu can be a black person, a white person, a person living in Alaska. It can be a person living in Indonesia. It's beyond ethnicity. The Hindu identity is a universal identity. And I think Hindus are still at that cusp of understanding the diversity of this Hindu umbrella, right? I went to Ghana and there's a wonderful ashram in Accra, right? Siddhartha is familiar with it. The roots of that ashram are in Rishikesh, right? Yes. So he'll know all about it. There are over 12,000 Ghanaians, right, who are totally immersed in the Hindu culture. Most of them have never been to India, by the way. But you go there at 5 a.m. to their ashram and you would think you are like in some 5th century BC Vedic ashram where Vedic chanting is happening. These are all African Ghanaians, right? They are Hindu, absolutely Hindu. So this is my point, and I think we have to get our head around that pretty quickly.
Sure. Thank you, Sachinji. Siddhartha, I'm going to go back to another question based on the Sampradayas. We talked about Buddhists, Jains, and the Sikhs, various sects coming from it. Because I want you to understand, now we almost saying Hindu as in a cultural identity, but I think briefly, Sachinji mentioned there was various religions. I want to get into that discussion and understand what that means. And before that, let's understand, within Hindu, there are various Sampradayas like Swaminarayan and ISKCON. What are the commonalities between these Sampradayas, and what is the philosophical link with the Hindu? Whether we're going to conclude it, what the identity is. I think Sachinji is proposing it as a cultural identity. We'll come on to that. What is the link between these commonalities as well as a philosophical link in various Sampradayas?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to look at the commonalities between these different Sampradayas would be to look at the scriptures, or the collections of teachings, the Shastras, as the instructions. And all of them today would completely respect the Vedas. Generally, it is said the Vedas as the supreme authority, but the Sanskrit word, in fact, simply means Vedas as a source of correct understanding of higher truths. That's all. The Vedas as a source of understanding, of a correct understanding of truths that lie deep within the human mind, the human consciousness. So the Vedas, they would respect the Vedas, they would respect the Upanishads, they would respect the Bhagavad Gita, they would respect most likely even the Brahma Sutras. And beyond that, then they would have their own set of texts, teachings of their own masters, who would have who would have tried to present these extremely ancient teachings in a new modern language to a new modern audience. This is what, for example, ISKCON has done. This is what Swaminarayan has done. And but basically, all these traditions that arose in the past, I can say, 1200 years, starting with Shankaracharya, when the great revival took place in India with Shankaracharya in the 8th century. So in the last 1200 years, all the traditions that arose, they have these reverence, or rather considering them a source of correct understanding for all these teachings. That would be the commonality between all these traditions. I think that would be the easiest way. Apart from that, of course, all of these traditions, they would worship different deities, they would have different masters. So this is what I meant when I said that there would be more similarity between the three Semitic religions. At least they have the same prophets. Here, I'm not even sure whether all the different traditions would respect the same masters or the same tradition. Each one has their own lineage of masters. That's why they are so varied and so different. Yet, all of them would look for deeper understanding, would look back to these timeless collections of teaching. The Puranas, the Mahabharata, Ramayana, all of that would be respected by them in general. So that is what unifies them.
Thank you, Siddhartha. Again, once again, a reminder to our audience, we're gonna very soon we start audience Q&A. We have quite a lot of questions. I think even some of the questions which I wanted to cover is already been from the audience, so probably we'll pick it in the audience Q&A. But before we move on, Sachinji, I want to ask you one more question. We talked about quite a lot about Hindu and what's the different elements of it, how we can become a Hindu. You said it's an about cultural identity, especially with the Christianity or Islam. If you're not believed in certain things, you can say you're not a Christian, you're not a Muslim. What is not a Hindu?
That's a good question. What is not a Hindu? Well, I mean, so let's reverse that. Let's reverse everything that I initially said, right? So you are somebody who has absolutely no respect, no connection, psychological or otherwise, with any of the literature that comes out of Bharat, right? That's one thing. You're not plural. In fact, you have an exclusivist mindset. You're convinced that your creed or dogma is the most supreme. As soon as you enter that state of mind, you're now creeping out of the Hindu spectrum, because the Hindu spectrum underlying it all is very plural, right? So I can disagree with Siddhartha till kingdom come about rituals and about masters and about philosophy. At the end of the day, I will still be happy to sit at his feet and learn from him, right? That's that plurality, right? So the moment you start thinking that yours is the best and yours is the most exclusive, and thereby, hence the challenge that Christianity and Islam and all of these exclusivist creeds and dogmas, and that's not a controversial statement, that's just the case, right? I mean, the Islamic creed starts with the fact that there is only Allah and Muhammad is the only his final messenger, right? So there's no controversy there. My argument is that the moment you lose your plurality, you lose your reverence for the literature and the traditions of that land. So for example, it doesn't matter what color you are, but if you're practicing Raksha Bandhan once a year, or if you're celebrating Diwali once a year, or if on New Year's, the Hindu New Year's, you go and take blessings from your elders, doesn't matter what color you are, doesn't matter what you believe, doesn't matter how you dress, none of that matters. What matters is that you're participating in a tradition and a custom that is thousands of years old, and it's been evolving and it's still evolving, right? So what is not a Hindu is somebody who is not participating in any of the customs, any of the traditions, in any of the literature, psychologically have removed themselves from the continuity of that civilization, right? So hence, remember, it's a spectrum. So you go from Hindu to a soft Hindu to a almost invisible Hindu to a non-Hindu, right? It's a spectrum, right?
I think one of the VM always says, if you're more confused, then we done our job. I'm not sure whether we are, probably we are entering into the territory of like Hindu started as an identity to the spectrum now. So it would be very interesting to see our audience questions, how that's going to form out. Before we start, Siddhartha, if you can quickly answer this particular question. In Hindu, we have quite a lot of literature, not just one book, one thing. We have from Vedas to Mahabharata, Ramayana, various texts. What are the role of these texts in overall in a Hindu identity? And how does this is a bit of a loaded question, sorry for that, but how does these texts united or influenced various parts of India? And also, probably I will add another part to it. How much is that literature is important for it to be a Hindu? Does it need to be in the literature? When we are talking about the literature, we have quite a lot of it. Does someone need to follow a particular section of literature, or does it need to follow the whole, the full of literature to be a Hindu? If that question makes sense.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Wonderful question, Rajashekarji. The collection of teachings, as I like to call them, Shastra, instructions, one of the beautiful things about them is precisely this sense of plurality, trying to bring all different worship methods, different philosophical positions together. So, for example, what we find in the Rig Veda is Ekam Sadvipra Bahudha Vadanti. Yes, the truth is one, but the wise express it in various ways. In Atharva Vedas, Prithvi Suktam, in the hymns to Mother Earth, Janam Bibhrati Bahudha Vivachasam, Mother Earth, you carry people of different tongues who speak different languages, nana dharmanam, and have varied customs, different customs, and yet prithvi yathaukasam, you are like a home to all of this variety. So it, from the very beginning, it recognizes the unity in diversity. So it recognizes unity, but at the same time, it also beautifully recognizes diversity. So I would say that these extremely ancient collection of teachings and the whole culture that they have produced has done a tremendous work. Because of these texts, we in fact are speaking about a unified identity that Sachinji has been, without Rigveda, without Mahabharata. Mahabharata does not only unify modern India, but in fact, Mahabharata and Ramayana, they unify most of Southeast Asia up to Philippines. They have been unifying culturally these so different groups of people. And so they have done a tremendous work. When I was traveling on foot in India from my childhood onwards with my father, I could see that in deep, remote regions, people would gather together, recite Akhanda Patha, recite day and night, Ramacharita Manasa. And that's what really brought people together. So they play an extremely active role to bring them together. The second question that you had asked about, now it was there in my mind, and I was just thinking.
Just saying, the literature side, how important is it? Does someone need to follow the full literature? One of the elements of Sachinji mentioned was,
yes.
Reverence to follow the.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Which text? I would say at least the Bhagavad Gita.
Okay.
I mean, how would we say Sarva Shastramayi Gita? One can find all the Shastras in their seed form. They merge into the Bhagavad Gita. You can find them. So at least the Bhagavad Gita, that much I believe everyone should once go through, just look at it and see what as what that person as an individual, then already there, because it's the essence of the Upanishads are the essence of the Vedas. So the entire Vedic culture is beautifully, and I can't think of a better text to recommend than.
Thank you, Siddhartha.
Yes.
We'll move on to audience Q&A. Before I move on to it, if I just summarize, if I just understood what I understood so far is, what we're saying is in a Hindu as in a cultural identity, like an umbrella term. Within that, we have various Sampradayas or various religions, if we call them as, like a Buddhist, Jains, and the Sikhs, or even Swaminarayan or ISKCON, they're all fall into it. And because Hindu, we are talking as in a religion as well. So Hindu can be another term within that, or Hindu can be only an umbrella term, but just the rest of them are the religions.
By definition, Raj, it has to be umbrella term.
Okay.
By definition. And that's why it's perplexing to me that in Britain, we have to tick a box called Hindu. It's what? Right? And if there is a box called Hindu, then all the Hindu religions are Hindu. It's perplexing. And I think it's perplexing to a lot of people. But we don't know how to express it. We don't know how to represent ourselves.
So I think for Hindus, you have a very good challenge, I guess. We not only need to change our own things, we have to go and change across the world, all the countries we are taking Hindu as a religion. Good luck to us. We'll move on to the audience Q&A. Thank you very much for all our audience who are sending a lot of questions. The first one we got is from Anamiko. How do I convince my parents that by not praying, I'm not rejecting Hindu Dharma? Siddhartha ji, can you answer that?
I would let Sachin ji have the first
one. No. I definitely want you to handle that one. I definitely want you to. I want to say the kind of dogmatic thing where you're going to go to hell if you don't pray. But I'm not going to do that. I'll refrain.
Okay. As long as you can convince them that you are trying to become a better human being, even if you are not praying, you are doing other things that help you become a radiant being, from a thinking being to a wise being. I think it's they will get convinced.
So in a way, we are saying,
Raj, can I just dovetail?
Sure.
So I can't remember his name, but whoever that person was, they may not be praying, but are they taking part in Hindu customs? Right? So did they practice Diwali? Do they celebrate Diwali? Do they visit India? Do they go to the temple? Do they meditate? Did they practice Holi? Do they play Holi this year? So if they are part and parcel of the tradition,
even the yoga or meditation, right? Even if
correct, yoga meditation, etc.
Yeah.
So that is ample evidence.
Sure.
But it's just that he or she may not have connected with the ritualistic side, and hence they are not praying. Fine, but that's not. Yeah.
Sure. So the next question is from Trishul. To explain to non-Hindus what is a Hindu is a challenging question. Due to this, is there a risk that our identity becomes overshadowed and progressively diluted? Sachinji, if you could answer that.
It's a real danger. It's a real danger. And the danger is that we ignore our own lived experience and we pigeonhole ourselves into religious dogma. Right? And I can see that happening in everyday life in Britain pretty much all the time. So for example, what I mean to say is a particular sampradaya comes along, and that sampradaya has a particular master, a particular set of texts, etc., etc. Now, for certain gain, for certain their own identity, because what happens is, you do, again, I'm going to be controversial. I apologize for all the hate mail you receive. But even though the spiritual people within any sampradaya may be spiritual and quite enlightened and quite progressive in the philosophical sense. The institution that they create, i.e. the religious dogma, the religious institution, does have and will have an institutional ego. That institutional ego is what drives partition in the Hindu identity. And it is a real challenge that the Hindu world faces. It's something that we have to overcome. Of course, it's not impossible. I mean, I'll give you an example. Judaism is quite a diverse set of beliefs. It's an umbrella term for a hugely diverse set of beliefs, right? But yet, on the whole, there is only one box called Jew, right? Jewish. There is no 5 boxes called, well, are you this kind of Jew? That, right? It's not there because they've managed to contain their institutional egos. The Hindu world will have to somehow harness, but at the same time reel back these individual institutional religious egos.
Thank you, Sachin. Siddhartha, we have another question from Hitesh. The question is, should the Hindu scriptures be categorized as religious, cultural, or dharmic? In which category should we categorize all our scriptures?
Okay. Depends which scriptures we are talking about. So the traditional classical categorization is that texts like Manusmriti are referred to as Dharma Shastras because they deal with Dharma. On the other hand, texts that are more widely read today, such as the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, they are categorized as Moksha Shastras. They are not categorized as Dharma Shastras. They are categorized as Moksha Shastras, which means instructions on freedom from, on acquiring freedom from the darkness of ignorance, from the bondage of ignorance. So they are categorized as Moksha Shastras, as collection of teachings that show us the path towards freedom. So this has been the classical way of categorizing these texts. They were never categorized as even Dharma Shastras, but as Moksha Shastras. Yes, as showing us the path towards freedom from the darkness of ignorance.
Thank you, Siddhartha.
Yeah.
We got another question from Hetal Acharya. We have heard about Christian atheist, but never a Hindu atheist. Is there a such term as Hindu atheist or a dharmic who is an atheist? I think to add to that one, Sachinji, can be atheist be a Hindu?
So a couple of things on that. I think the question, I'm going to take a guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe Hetal G, if she's watching, can clarify it. But what she means to say is that a Christian can become an atheist. Mm-hmm. There is no such thing as a Christian atheist. That's an oxymoron, right? Yeah. So that can't exist. So you can't say that I'm a Christian, but I don't believe in God and I don't buy into the Christ's message. So if you don't buy into Christ's message, then you can't be a Christian. I mean, it just goes without saying, and therefore you're an atheist, because they are rejecting a creed. So if you reject a particular religious dogma, then you are an atheist. But as I mentioned, the Hindu does not have a religious dogma that gives you your identity. So therefore, of course, in fact, the word atheism, if I'm being a purist, doesn't even apply to the Hindu world. It just doesn't even apply. I don't know how Siddhartha would feel about this, but I just don't think it even applies. I mean, you can have a Nastika, Astika, fine, but that's not the same as theist and atheist. Because we don't even, our very fundamentals of our identity are not rooted in religious dogma. So I can reject all the religious dogmas that may be there. Sure. But yet I can be a Hindu.
Okay. Yes. In fact, if I may allow to add to this, out of the 6 Vaidika philosophical systems, which are known as the orthodox Vaidika philosophical systems, 3, so which means 50%, half of them. Vaisheshika by Maharshi Kanada, that is, you could say atheist or agnostic, but does not see the need of an idea of Ishvara, of God. Similarly, Sankhya has 2 streams. One of the streams is the stream which sees no need for a creator God and therefore rejects the idea. Mimamsaka, the hardcore ritualistic Vaidika philosophers, even they, Kumarila Bhatta, they completely rejected the idea of Ishvara, rejected the idea of God. So you can have, as I said, and these are Vaidika philosophies, they still accept Veda as a source of understanding for a higher truth. They follow Dharma, they will follow yoga, they will respect all of that, and yet they don't see a need of accepting a God. Or so this has been classically there since extreme ancient times. So it's completely acceptable. Yeah.
And you know, Rajashekar, one of the funniest things I've experienced, and I always have some inner laughter when I hear people who say to me, very convinced, right? Very, very intelligent people, very convinced, and they say, Sachin, I am an atheist. I am not a Hindu. And then with the next breath, they'll go and celebrate Diwali, or they will go and do Raksha Bandhan, or play Holi, right? I mean, all you can do is laugh at that point.
I think there is an element of this misunderstanding or not knowing the information, right? Because Hindu is always seen as a religious identity. And whenever we see this as a religious identity, if I'm not following the rituals, then I'm not a Hindu. But I think the whole Hindu is moving from geography to religion to cultural identity. We got another question from Om. And his question is, are we Hindus, or should we abandon the Hindu identity and go back to Sanatana, Vaidika, Shaiva, Shakta, or the various terms should we use it? Either of you, whoever want to go with that one. Siddhartha-ji, should we start with you, and then we'll ask Sachin-ji.
Okay. Yes, I think he's referring to Shakta, Vaishnava, Shaiva, and Smarta, these 4 identities which are now today quite generally being used for, but again, these are, they cannot be umbrella terms. The problem is that you cannot use them. They are beautiful words, and they, of course, they mean a lot. They are beautiful because they categorize certain traditions, so you can have all the Shiva worshippers under the Shaiva, all the Shakti, those who worship Shakti in her hundreds of forms, they would all be Shaktas. Those who worship Vishnu and his incarnations, Rama and Krishna, they would all fall under Vaishnava. Smarta is slightly more complex because Smartas worship all of them by choosing one main deity. That's Shankaracharya's tradition. And so you have these different methods of categorization which actually arose in pre-British Indian society. So they are very much how the Indian society tried to categorize themselves. Beautiful, but we cannot use them as an umbrella term. The way Sachinji has defined Hindu today for all of us, it would be very difficult to find an equivalent term other than, I think, Sanatana Dharma would be, but this is a word that is, while it is known to all Hindus, it is not known to non-Hindus. But otherwise, the only equivalent term that I can think of would be Sanatana Dharma, which is an extremely ancient word. Again, Rigveda uses Dharmani Sanata. The word comes from Rigveda, so it's an extremely ancient word. The Buddha uses it, Manusmriti uses it, the Bhagavad Gita uses it, the word Sanatana. So it's an extremely ancient word, and that would be the only similar word that I can think of. Shaiva, Shakta, Smarta, they are categorizations within Hinduism.
Sachinji, before
And also, just and I totally
Sachinji, sorry,
agree.
Sachin, before you answer that question, we have another question from Nikunj. If we remove Hindu from religion, if we remove Hindu as a word from our religious choice in Britain, what is the word you would suggest? I think I thought follow up to the same
Sure.
question. If you agree with Siddhartha ji, do you suggest the same word as well?
So look, I think these questions, as intellectually interesting as they are not very practical. You see, and I agree with Siddhartha that philosophically and in terms of literature and custom and tradition and history, the only other word might just be Sanatana Dharma. So I totally accept that. And he's absolutely correct that only the Hindus will understand that term, nobody others, right? So it's like, so I think this is a question of pragmatism, not idealism. The identity of this civilization that today we are referring to as Hindu, 1,000 years ago was something else. 2,000 years ago was something else. 1,000 years from now, I promise you, it will not be Hindu. It will be some other word. It's okay, right? Like that is not what we should be obsessed about, what to call ourselves. What I think we should be obsessed about is our lived experience of this civilization, which today we call Hindu, is it congruent to our psychological and our political and our economic and social expression? Right? So is my diversity as a Hindu fully captured in the census? Is it fully captured in political rhetoric, in economic rhetoric, in social rhetoric, right? Like, is that done? Does the Hindu and then the non-Hindu, do they understand the diversity and the depth and the plurality and the antiquity of this civilization and this term Hindu, right? And what it encapsulates. So my only suggestion here is that, and therefore Nikunj's question about what should we call ourselves in the census, Hindu, right? It's a non-question to me because it's a question of pragmatism. I agree that in hundreds of years' time,
I might need to stop you there. We are running out of time, and I apologize to our audience. We have quite a lot of questions, but we are already near to the time, and we might overrun for a couple of minutes as well, because I want to get your final remarks, and then we'll conclude our manthan here. I don't think we have much time for more questions. So going back to, I think we'll close our discussion with your final remarks from both of you. We'll start with you, Siddhartha. If you can conclude in 2 minutes time or less than 2 minutes time, if you could, what would be your message for all the different Sampradayas? I think we talked about quite a bit because now we define Hindu as in a culture, and there was all of these religions, and all of them are part and parcel of Hindu. But many certain sections of the people from either Buddhists, Jains, or even sometimes we hear from ISKCON or Swaminarayan, as we are not Hindus. What would be your message to them from a philosophical point of view to these sections of people?
I would just recite the two final concluding mantras from the Rig Veda, composed by Maharshi Samvanana, the most ancient collection of teachings from the Indian subcontinent, and respected by everyone who respects the Vedas. This would be a message to all of them, because this is far more ancient than any one of these traditions. So I would just say the translation of these two mantras: come together, assemble, speak together, let your minds be of one accord in the same way as the ancient radiant ones partake from your appointed share, giving up all mutual conflicts. Let your intentions be common, not against anyone. Let them be virtuous. Let your wishes be common. So he's talking about concordance. Let your thoughts be common, so that there is a thorough union or good coexistence among you. Thousands and thousands of years ago, this was the final message of the Vedic rishis to the coming generations. The closer we come to this message, the happier we will be, and the farther we move away from it, the more problems we will have in our society.
Thank you, Siddhartha. Sachin, in your closing remarks, I'm assuming, and you are a British citizen, right? And if someone asks you, are you a Hindu? If so, what is that makes you a Hindu? What would you be? What would be your answer?
So I am a Hindu. Tick. On the census, I tick the Hindu box. Tick. And what makes me a Hindu is that, you see, my temperament, and Siddhartha has probably sussed this out already, and as many viewers may already have, is that my temperament is such that I pursue my Hindutva, my Hindu-ness, through my actions. So karma, right? Through my actions and through jnana. So I have a deep desire. I'm a seeker. I want to study. I want to know. I want to question. I want to critique. And I want to embrace. And all the while knowing that that thing which I am trying to do is to better myself as a human being and to become a fuller human being, a wholesome human being, right? What the Greeks would have classed as a virtuous human being, right? And what I want to experience in life is ananda, again, what the Greeks would have called eudaimon, right? So these are universal human desires and traits. What makes me Hindu is that I am choosing consciously to participate in a culture that I believe over thousands and thousands of years has some seriously deep nuggets of wisdom that if I can untap and unlock, it will benefit and help me flourish and become fully evolved. That is what makes me a Hindu, that I follow those customs and traditions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sachinji and Siddharthji. It was an extremely insightful conversation, and I think it answered some questions, and also I'm sure it might have confused some of us as well. But at the end of it, at least what I understood, what I taking away from this discussion is, if I have to summarize, Hindu is a cultural and a civilization construct, and it's an umbrella term. Within that, we have various religions, which can be either Buddhist, Jains, or the Sikhs, or various Sampradayas. Various of them are part of the Hindu identity, and as in a cultural identity. So, what makes someone as a Hindu? Hindu is anyone who is either have a reverence for Bharat, or ancestry coming from the geographical area, or connection with cultural practices such as yoga, music, or even food, or connection with ancient literature with that region. I think these are the four different elements which Sachinji has mentioned, and Siddharthaji almost agreed with all of those things. I think as a final message, it seems these are the four. If you fall into any of those four elements, you could be a Hindu. And the central organizing concept of this whole identity is Dharma. I think that's one of the main reasons Vichamanthan explores every contemporary issue in the lens of Dharma. Thank you, everyone who joined us today from wherever you are. VM is a voluntary-led organization. All our Karyakartas not only give their time and effort, but most of them are well-wishers too. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all our well-wishers. Without your contributions, we won't be able to do what we are trying to do with these events. If anyone wanted to become a well-wisher and support Vichamanthan, you can do so by scanning the QR code on the screen, or you can find the link in our YouTube comment section. Before we leave today, I'd like to ask all our audience to subscribe YouTube channel and also subscribe to our mailing list so that you can find all about our events in advance. You can find these details on www.vichamanthan.org/mailing list. Before I conclude, I would like to say it's COVID. This is a COVID time, and we're supposed to have another speaker today, James Haggerty. And this event is also supposed to be chaired by one of our Karyakarta, Kishan Chauhan. But unfortunately, both of them got tested positive, and they are recovering well, and they are now healthy. But what I would like to ask all our audience is, please be safe, look after yourself. COVID is still not gone, so take precautions and stay safe. VM also runs book clubs across the country, and also we recently initiated a new VM podcast. If you want to know more details about our book clubs or VM podcast, please log in into our website. You'll find all the details you're looking for. Just on the podcast side, recently Siddhartha Ji Krishna spoke about Hindu literature, and Sachin Ji spoke on Dharma. We have another VM events as well on the sustainability and the Dharma point of view. So you could find quite a lot of details, and you can find all of those information on our VM website. Please log in and check all the information. Our next event will be in 10 days' time. This time it is not in 2 weeks, but in 10 days' time on 30th October at 7 p.m. What is the role of culture in tackling climate change? Hope to see you all there. Once again, thank you and namaste.